Hey everybody, welcome to episode 11 of Are We There Yet? I'm your host, Susan Ruth.
I'm your host, Mara Adelman, and we have with us today Laura Zam. And so instead of being two humans, today we are three humans who are going to have the real conversations and raise the questions that we all have about where the there is in dating, relationships, and sex.
And today's episode is called What's Your Pleasure?
What's your pleasure? We're going to talk with Laura about impediments to pleasure. And so, Laura, tell us your specialty in all of these things.
Absolutely. I'm a sexual solutions coach, which means that I'm a sexuality educator, also a relationship coach, and I specialize in sexual problems and helping people find the right solution, especially women and people in female bodies. Yeah. I'm also the author of a book called The Pleasure Plan, which is a book about my own sexual healing journey. And I'm obsessed with sexual health and healing.
Love it. Perfect for this topic. Susan, we forgot to ask you. So where's your there been this week? What's been going on over there?
For me, my there has been recovering from COVID. And also, I've been thinking a lot about getting back on the proverbial horse and what that looks like, and having the concern that because it's really been so long since I've been sexually active, deeply sexually active, that somehow my parts are not going to work as well, that things are going to feel tight or too tight or, so I actually practiced with that dildo just to see, and certainly things were a little tight down there, more so than I was used to. So I thought, oh my God, I am broken. So I think I've got a little work to do down there, and that's where I'm there at now.
I like that a lot. I'm going to have to practice too, because my there is, I just haven't felt very sexual. I think we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Like high stress moments make you just not really want to think about sex as much. So I'm just trying to find all the pleasure. My fingers are killing me because I'm learning to play guitar. And I realized that as a medical provider, like I've always put all these other things to the side, and I like singing and dancing and music. And so Wednesday night I went out to karaoke and hung out with a guy friend and sang background. I'm not like Susan, who can sing front up with the microphone, but just being out and about and doing that brought me pleasure, not sexual pleasure. But so I'm hoping the more fun I have, the more maybe I'll feel like sex again, hopefully soon, even with just myself. I'm kind of like, yeah, whatever. Like it's just on the back burner right now.
Yeah. Laura, what about you? Where's your there?
Oh, well, I had some computer issues today. It's been a great week, but I did have these unexpected computer issues just when I was trying to get something completed that I had set aside this day to finish a huge project. And I'm going away tomorrow to Charlottesville to visit some friends, and then going to New York next week. I'm having a book party. So I wanted to get everything just in order, but of course the universe handed me something, a little challenge today. So good reminder, go with the flow.
Good. Go with the flow. It's a very good advice.
I was just telling Susan, I was wondering why the universe kept throwing me all of these balls. And I said, it's because I have to remember we have no real control. We have to go with the flow. I like that, Laura. I'm going to write that down. Go with the flow.
Mm-hmm. Well, so this episode is all about finding pleasure sometimes in cases where we feel limited. Our own limitations get in the way, our own self-prescribed even limitations get in the way, or maybe they're actually physical limitations.
Yes. Oh, sorry. I think we were kind of referring it to as impediments to all pleasure, things that impede pleasure. And yes, Laura, tell us more about these things that can impede our pleasure.
Absolutely. So there are three main things that impede pleasure. I believe that they fall into three buckets, and those buckets all have P's, just like, well, one of them is pleasure itself, right? Is that pleasure is not up to par, and we don't necessarily have skills to make it, to fix it. Another P is power, that we don't have a feeling of agency that can allow us to make things better in the bedroom. And this can particularly apply if you feel like you're broken, right? If you feel victimized, if you feel that there are physical limitations that are, right, just stand in your way and it's hopeless. A lot of people with bedroom issues feel hopeless. And I feel like the antidote for that is power, actually. And the third is presence, is being able to be in our bodies. And I would say there's a couple of things that are associated with that: feeling safe, but also accepting our bodies, and being able to be true as well to our body's reactions. So just, I mean, there's a million things that can go wrong in the bedroom, but I like to put them into these three big buckets and then talk about how solutions come out of these three Ps, that the solutions are all associated with the three Ps.
I like it. Sorry, I forgot the first one. So we've got power, presence. What was the first one?
Well, they can go in any order, but
Yeah.
I like to put it, actually, I like to say presence,
Pleasure,
and power.
and
I like to
power.
go in that order, although they're all interconnected, so you can start anywhere.
Yes, yes,
Like a circle.
yes.
And I think a big part of that too is, again, we come back to communication a lot on the show, of being able to say, for example, in my case, hey, I haven't had sex in a while, masturbated, no problem. But, but there's a difference between having a penis inside me and having a vibrator. It's just a different experience. And to be able to say, hey, this, things might be a little tighter down there, or we might need to work a little harder, or whatever it is, and not feel bad or guilty or weird or broken in those cases.
Yeah, so yeah, I love these examples, Susan, because, and so let's go down a level, right? Because I did this kind of, very conceptual view of problems, but let's talk concretely about things that, especially that women face. So there can be pain issues. 75% of women have experienced painful sex, painful penetration at some point in their lives. A lot of those women are, let's say, 40 and above, who are experiencing different effects of hormone changes. And it's not just right at menopause, which is, I think, the average, about 50 or 51 years old, but can start earlier. Susan, we chatted about this last week a little bit. But pain can also be related to antihistamines. Pain can be related to birth control pills, believe it or not. Pain can and is related to not being aroused enough. And women particularly often feel rushed in terms of getting turned on, so that there can be some event that is supposed to please a partner. This is a pattern that women fall into. So pain is a big issue for women. Body issues, huge issue. Body acceptance. Lots of times people do not feel sexy because they don't feel sexual because they don't feel sexy. And they don't feel sexy because they are critical. We are critical, right? It's so ingrained to be critical of our bodies. And other issues that can happen are other kinds of dysfunction, but I like, at the beginning of my journey, I thought of it as dysfunction, but now I'm seeing that it's much more tied to these three Ps. But these are issues related to orgasm, arousal, and desire. Those are the three areas. One thing I'll add as well is the effects of trauma. I think these are the main areas that are, right, that women particularly, when things go wrong, they often go wrong in these areas.
So we've got trauma, body image, which men have too, I think, but by far, I think as the female species, we hold the cake for that one. So yeah, trauma and yeah, all that. Yeah.
And then pain, right? So we've got, right. Pain. So there's trauma, there's pelvic pain or painful sex.
Right.
There is different kinds of issues with arousal, desire, and orgasm, and those are all very, very related. And then we've got those body issues.
And let's talk a little bit about from the male perspective when we have erectile dysfunction or distraction, or as Mara pointed out, body issues or maybe physical disabilities. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. So about 50% of men over the age of 40 have erectile dysfunction. So it's the statistics are huge. And erectile dysfunction is less prevalent with men under the age of 40, around 25%, although there are wildly varying statistics depending on whom you ask. But there is consensus on this, that men under 40, that their erectile dysfunction is often associated with anxiety, performance anxiety. Over the age of 40, it starts to have a strong association with vascular issues. But erectile dysfunction is very common, as you can see, and for any people of any gender. It can be very embarrassing, even humiliating, to have these kinds of problems. But men and people in male bodies do experience, like I said, these high rates of erectile dysfunction. There's also this performance anxiety piece. There can also be pain issues, pelvic pain issues. There can be as well all kinds of, as you said, these different kinds of body issues, different kinds of confidence issues.
Also,
and also premature ejaculation.
Yes, that's a big one. Also, when we talk about pain, we don't want to forget like just body pain. Like I've got a neck problem, and sometimes I'm like, whoa, like, certain things are not going to work right now because my neck hurts, right? And so body pain. I was with a partner, and his back was hurting and my neck was hurting, and I was like, oh, my neck, and he's like, oh, my back. And I was like, okay, now I'm feeling old. And there's that rap song that's all nasty. My neck, my back, lick my, and I was like, oh, we're old, but we made fun of it. And so I think if you can work through all these impediments, right, you can still find pleasure. Is that the goal of all this? Is you can still make it work even when it's not working perfectly.
Yes, you can make it work. And that's why I like these 3 Ps, because they point to just, no matter what's going on, they point to a way that we can find our way out of this.
Right.
And I'll throw in some other tips as well under those categories or rubrics. But as an example, right? If somebody's experiencing painful sex, so women are also notorious, or people in female bodies are also notorious for not mentioning this to a doctor or a partner, suffering in silence. This is really, really a huge problem, because the medical profession doesn't evolve if they're not presented with this issue. And doctors are, for the most part, including gynecologists, are not educated on these kinds of sexual problems.
Guilty until I took a sexology program, and I still feel like my learning is here and it needs to be here. And so as medical providers, we don't have any of this training. Well, we have a very small amount. And so it takes people like you who know how to coach people into like figuring it out, probably.
Right. It's like I was talking to someone the other day, and she said that since her pregnancy, which was almost 6 years ago, she's had painful sex with certain positions. Interestingly enough, she had a C-section. And I just read a study out of Australia that showed 50% of women had pain with sex after childbirth. And it didn't matter whether they had a vaginal birth or it was a C-section.
Interesting.
Isn't that interesting?
You think it's nerve related, maybe like nerve pain that from the C? Yeah, interesting.
It didn't say exactly, or maybe
mentally.
Yeah.
Women,
they're like, don't do that to me. Don't get me pregnant again. That was horrible.
No, I never want to do that again. Totally.
Anyway, she said that. So she said, I said, have you mentioned it to your doctor? And she said, no. She said, when I go, the doctor says, is there anything else you want to mention? And sometimes it runs through her head, but then she's like, nah, it's not a big deal. The doctor doesn't say to her, are you experiencing pain with intercourse or with some kind of sexual activity? That would be helpful.
You know why we don't though, Laura? Because it's opening a box that we don't always have the answers to. Again, I've learned more now, but we don't want to ask anything as a provider that then opens a box that we don't have the answer to. So that's an education across the board thing, right?
Yes, and that's great. That is really, it's so great to have your perspective on this, Mara, as a health practitioner, to see that, right? That this is right, that the answer is goes back to training. But anyway, this I'm very long-winded answer. But let's say somebody has is experiencing painful sex. So going back to these 3 P's, I'm going to say that the most helpful P initially is going to be power, right? And that is to advocate for herself. Or whatever the pronoun is that the person's using, to be able to say that this is not acceptable to me and I'm seeking a remedy, right? That to me is an issue of power. It's also an issue of pleasure, right? Figuring out maybe different positions that, right, that might not cause pain, especially if somebody's, let's say, spoken up to a doctor and going through some sort of rehabilitation for this, or figuring out what the best hormones are or whatever the solution is. But I think foremost, that's going to be a power issue, you see? So, right, and if somebody is, well, often it's power is like a good place to start, because often it is power for people in female bodies to just be able to speak up and to say, this is important. My experience is important.
We've never been taught that though. Susan and I have talked a bunch on our podcast about how as women, we've never been taught that pleasure is anything we should even be seeking. So why would women feel like then they would have the agency to say, fix it? Does that make sense? Like we haven't even ever been taught that that's something we should be trying for.
Right. Women who seek pleasure are sluts, men who seek pleasure are studs, that kind of information. I think that is changing as people learn more about sexuality and sex and pleasure. And I think part of maybe the learning process too is to understand that a sexual experience doesn't have to be orgasm focused. Sure, orgasms are great, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't have to be, the pleasure doesn't have to be the end game is orgasm. Pleasure can be touch or taste or smell or conversation, all these things that could eventually lead to an orgasm, but that to take that out of the end game, which also maybe takes the pressure off.
Yes, and the women that I work with as clients, I'd say 100% of them want to take the pressure off. That is often a big pleasure solution, is just to take the pleasure off. And often it is to take off the table orgasm, having that be a requirement. And also for heterosexual cisgender women, which is mostly my clientele, but not exclusively, but for them, often taking intercourse off the table is a really helpful way of activating their desire. And I believe it's because, well, it's a number of things, but I believe it's because intercourse is often defined, or let's say that the way that intercourse happens is very much geared toward the penis having fun. So the female, let's say, or the woman might really enjoy intercourse, but the way that it happens in her particular bedroom is so focused on the penis and making sure it has its orgasm that it starts to feel like, oh, like I just have to like do this to make sure somebody else has this ejaculation. And then it turns into well, I don't want one more thing to do. I'm tired. I don't want to do anything, right? I just want to relax.
I've heard
And
from
so
several
then-
clients when they touch me on the arm and I know he wants to have sex and I feel like I'm going to vomit because I don't want that. So you're saying when you take the intercourse off the table and take it back to pleasure, that then it feels less of a chore again. Is that
That's
like,
right.
yeah.
And then what it opens up is a question of what would be pleasurable for me? What would I be into? What would I be interested in?
Mhm.
Right? Because if it's not defined, predefined that we're going to have intercourse, I might be interested in making love. Because if intercourse in my mind is I've got to service you, or it's a little too involved for me this evening. I just had a stressful day. I don't want to have to get that. I don't want to have to get that worked up or that receptive, because it's, you've got to get yourself to a state for it to feel good. Something's going to go inside. And sometimes women are not in the mood for all that, but they might be in the mood for something, right? So that's an example of where the P would come in, right? Where it would be like, what's my pleasure? What would be pleasurable for me?
I feel like pressure is a good number 4 to your buckets. I feel like pressure drives so much of the reason that women don't always feel like having sex. And sometimes the pressure drives men to have the erectile dysfunction and not be able to have sex because they get nervous. Pressure is bad for everybody.
I think I may need to add a 4th P.
Pressure, man. No more pressure.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be fun. And us single girls are over here. I'm like, I don't know. You could pressure me. Like, I get there's a difference when we're talking about this because I'm like, oh, I would say yes every time. But after a period of time with somebody, I understand that stops happening.
Well, and if you have a penis, I think that's also everything you just said, Laura, is applicable, because I think the idea that they might come too quickly or not soon enough or whatever in between, and what's ever going on inside their head, or feeling like they have to bring a woman or a female to orgasm, or, or their partner, whoever their partner is, whether it's, we understand on this show, we're talking about all kinds of relationships and sex and no judgment. But I think too, men, they have a lot of pressure as well, or people with penises have a lot of pressure as well, and that they're supposed to perform this Greek god status of lovemaking, and my gosh, I imagine, not being a man, but I imagine that it's tricky for someone who has been taught they're supposed to be this alpha male or this sexual dynamo, who has questions or has issues or has stuck up in their head. How are they supposed to get help? Because that's even maybe more terrifying, I feel like.
Absolutely. And I find that with clients, I find that with the partners of clients, I find that with when I do public speaking, often it is men who want to voice, sometimes for the first time, especially in a maybe public way, or how terrifying it is. And I came upon this situation, this dynamic that I still find absolutely fascinating. So women would complain to me that their partners were not adventurous in bed, that the women would, for instance, hand them a book on cunnilingus and say, hey, hun, read this. I'd really love to read this with you and like to explore some tips. And that their partners would never pick up the book. And from the perspective of my female clients, they'd say, he doesn't care about my pleasure. It's just, he's just so selfish. It's just all about his penis. But then when I have the opportunity to speak to the men, it takes a little finagling to get to the truth of this. But there's a few things happening. One is the rejection of like, oh, I haven't been doing this right. Oh. Is that why we're reading this book? And then it's a lot of avoidance, because that just feels very humiliating. But also men have all this pressure on them, but also they don't have a lot of avenues for emotional expression. So men tend to take their emotional needs and squish them into sexual fulfillment and sexual validation.
Yes. For men, especially a lot of men with any kind of avoidance issues, in the bedroom is the place where they can let that all be.
Let that all go, but it's
Yeah.
that's where the place where they're getting their like core emotional needs met.
Yes.
Is through sex and through somebody saying, I find you attractive, I want to have sex with you. That is a way that they're having their emotional needs met. And so when they're rejected in this way, it's like, it's very devastating because they don't have a lot of other, and this is, I'm stereotyping and generalizing, but this is something that is legion in our society, you know, in terms of this kind of socialization of men. But anyway, bottom line with this is that men sometimes are not adventurous. They don't want to try different things because they've got a very narrow way that they have a narrow set of skills, right? They have this competence that they have developed.
And they feel confident in that, and they're more scared
and
to
they don't want to
out.
color outside the lines because they feel that they're going to be criticized. And they just want to stay within this realm of competence. They're terrified of not being competent. And also it's not just the competence, but that's how they're getting their needs met, right? Emotionally. So it's like, it's just a Pandora's box. If now they're not going to be, that they're no longer, they read the book and now they don't know what they're doing. And also she's going to reject him because there's so much pressure also emotionally on being able to be accepted and validated through sex. And so it's, there's so much going on that is not talked about openly. And so it gets very misconstrued. And I think we tend to not necessarily understand what's really going on with our partners because people of all genders are guilty of not really speaking up about our truth. And often it's not a guilt thing. In this case, we don't know what our truth is because we've never been taught to get in touch with the truth.
Absolutely. I had a conversation with a guy friend of mine the other day, and he said, oh, I hate oral sex. I hate going down on a woman. And I said, oh, do you do it anyway? And he said, well, yeah, because that's what women want. They want oral sex and then regular sex. I said, well, I don't think that's true of all women. And also, how does that make you feel? Like when you feel like you have to do this thing, it must mess with your head for the intimacy of the act. And he's like, yeah, you just kind of go along to get along. That's such a bummer. Think of all the things that is being robbed from him in a pleasurable sexual experience because he feels like he has to do this thing, you know. I know if, like in college, I had a female roommate. She hated the idea of anyone going down on her. She hated it. So, you know, there are women obviously that don't like it either for whatever reason. And it's just, I think without those conversations that are separate from the bedroom, I think if we're in bed with somebody and we're like, okay, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, that might be overwhelming in an intimate setting. But maybe when you're out for a walk with your intended sex partner, or you're having coffee, or, you know, it's someplace outside of the sacred bed that you can actually say, hey, what do you like? This is what I like. What do you enjoy? And have that conversation that firstly might take off the pressure. And also it's neutral. I feel like it's a neutral space.
It is, it's a neutral space. And it's also can be very arousing, right? To have those conversations with a prospective lover, right? About those conversations can be quite juicy. And I totally agree that I think that having them outside the bedroom is going to take away that the fourth P, which is a bad P. So I'll have to do like presence, pleasure, because these are all solutions, power, and then no pressure. I'll have to add.
No pressure.
No.
I want to thank you, Laura.
Pressure less.
You really finally made that make sense to me, Laura, because I've had friends and clients and patients all say to me, I can't get my male partner to branch out and try new things. And I feel like it's the same, we're in a rut. And I hear that a lot. And now it makes more sense. And it never really made sense to me why, if men are the ones that notoriously are kind of asking for more sex, not all the time, but then how come they're not willing to kind of branch out? Because it's almost like an ego thing, because they understand how to do their thing.
That's right.
Interest. Thank you. That was it was an aha moment. I love those. That's made a lot more clear to me. And Susan, I was thinking about your poor friend. I just saw this really cool thing. They have a toy that performs oral sex. It's like a tongue. So, if he's with a partner and he really doesn't want to have oral sex, he can just use the toy on her. I don't know. That's a conversation. And in 2 weeks, we're talking all about toys and how to bring those into the bedroom. So we'll have to.
There's a match for everyone sexually, I believe.
Yeah.
I had somebody, wasn't a client, but it was somebody that I knew. And he confided in me that he had chronic and permanent erectile dysfunction.
Mhm.
Something had happened. It might have been nerve damage or something. And he would never be able to have an erection. And he had tried everything. He tried hormones, and I think he tried penile pumps and all kinds of different mechanisms. And I knew, and I tried to tell him, but he felt that he was broken and that no one would ever love him. And he was in his 50s, and I was telling him all the women that I knew in their 50s who didn't want to have penetrative sex because they had pain with intercourse, and they were looking for someone who was not going to put the pressure on them to have penetrative sex.
Right.
And that if they could just find each other, it was a match in heaven.
It is, yes.
Right? Match in
Was
heaven.
was he able to ejaculate without an erection? Because I know that's also something that you can ejaculate without having an erection.
I don't know. What I do know is he did find someone.
Yay!
I don't know the details of their bedroom or anything, but I know that he did find a love. Yes.
I love it. There is a pot, or the lid for every pot. Yes.
There is a lid for every pot. Exactly.
Well, and I go back to the toy thing, because we're going to do a deep dive into this in a couple of weeks, but there's strap-ons, there's dildos. Like, just because if it's not working for a guy, if the woman does want penetrative sex, it doesn't necessarily have to be penile, right? There are other ways to interact together with toys. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, in the sexology field, Mara, what we say, we're trying to move people toward non-PIV, non-penis and vagina sex.
Yes.
And there's different names for it. I have a little construct that is of that ilk, but it just goes a little more in this direction. I call it tapas sex, TAPAS. And I came up with the name for this because I thought, traditional sex, or traditional, let's say, in a heterosexual cis situation, is often thought of as foreplay and intercourse. And one could think of it using a food metaphor, think of it as appetizer and main dish. Appetizer and main dish. Tapas is a different meal construct because there is no appetizer and main dish. It's just lots of little dishes.
Ooh, I like that is my favorite kind of sex. I love tapas sex. I already see where you're going with this. Yes.
So tapas sex to me is an intimacy solution. It's a pleasure. It's a power solution. It's a pressure solution, because in tapas sex, everyone gets to choose what menu items they want. If somebody just wants a massage and to eat some chocolate in bed, that's really like what they want out of a making love experience, and somebody else wants, let's say, intercourse and maybe also a massage, you can just kind of put that together. People ordered, right? You got 2 items, I got 2 items. And I find that people, myself included, I practice this as well, much more inclined to be open to somebody else's needs when I can say, hey, what I really want is this, right? And I'm gonna be able to get that, right? And so, yeah, I don't mind, you're right, going into these other territories, because I can also say, you know what, I just want a back massage, a really long back massage.
And what do you do if your partner's like, but today I feel like intercourse, I guess mutual masturbation, or like, so that's the problem, is then if it's not lining up, how do you compromise, right?
Yeah, well, you know what, the way I think about it is that you get 2 items, I get 2 items.
Mhm.
But if I feel that I hate one of your items, it's going to be triggering, or it's going to make me uncomfortable, or I'm really not into it, I have veto power. And that way you can work out solutions. But sometimes solutions are not necessary, because if I'm getting my back massage and my berries in bed, or my chocolate in bed, and I can have that experience and have it as long as I want, I don't feel the pressure like, oh, he's waiting for me to finish because because it really is foreplay, because it's no longer foreplay. I know that intercourse is something you want, and I agree to it, so I'm open to it, but I also get my experience. So I'm not resentful. It doesn't feel like a chore. It feels like oh, we're gonna, like, I don't want the lo mein, but you want the lo mein, so we're gonna order the lo mein.
I like it.
That's funny. I think about that Friends episode where Monica and Rachel are explaining to Chandler that it's not just, boo, boo, vagina, but that it's, 7, 3, 2, 1. Like, if the body was mapped out, that most people think, oh, I just go to these 3 spots, or these 2 spots, or this 1 spot, and I'm golden. When in fact, the erogenous zone of the body is the body and sometimes the brain. But that people forget that too. And that's part of it as well. That tapas could even be the body parts. That there are certain areas of the body that are turn-ons. Like, some people like their feet tickled, some people like under their knees or behind their ears. I hate having a tongue in my ear. Hate it, hate it, hate it. Don't do that to me. But I love my neck kissed, so to also talk about those sorts of things, I think it's an important conversation.
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's going back to this thing like, oh, well, am I going to mind it or be put off if I have to accommodate somebody else's needs? I think less so when we can define lovemaking and define our needs in this way, like, right? Like, I just want my toes touched, right? That's what I'm choosing as a whole menu item. I think what happens is often people of all genders, they don't ask for what they really want, as like, this is the kind of pleasure experience that I want. In a like a complete form. It's not foreplay. This is what I want. I want a full experience where you are engaging with my toes. Mm-hmm. And then once that's done, once I'm satisfied, we can move on to maybe one of your activities. But I get to play that out to my full satisfaction. I'm not having my satisfaction cut short or looked at as not as important en route to your satisfaction. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. I think the other reason I really like it is because I hear from a lot of people that, who has time nowadays? Time is like our scarcest resource. So that it's like that end of the night, 10 minutes at the end of the night thing. It feels like when you're talking about the tapas menu, you have to make a conscious effort to say, we're going to put aside a little bit of time for this, which I personally, my favorite is like, lay in bed all day, eat something, have some sex, watch some movie, have some sex, tickle some toes, have some sex, eat some food. Like, but again, finding time for that. So the tapas idea means that people have to put away some time to have a real experience versus just some quick intercourse.
Yes, and I mean you can do quick tapas, just a couple of things, but everybody, everybody involved gets something, right? They get their own little whatever it is. It doesn't have to be lengthy, but it can be that at least that there is, right? Everyone's making a choice about what they would like, and sometimes people do make choice and say, you know what, I would just like to please you. That's my choice. I really don't want to be touched tonight. I don't want to like get undressed even. But I would just like it to be like, it's just when it feels like it's a choice and not a chore and not an expectation, I feel that a lot of the layers of resistance drop away.
Because it gives you your power back.
Right.
Yes.
Well said.
These are good peas. I like your peas.
Laura, what's a great way for people to find you out there in the world?
Well, there are a couple of ways. I do have a freebie, so people can go right to my freebie, just directly there. The URL is mysensualpotential.com. And that freebie is 5 simple solutions to any sex problem. So, and they're drawn from this, but they're a little bit different, but they are kind of broad spectrum in this way where you can apply them to any sex problem. So I welcome people to do that. You can also find me at my own website or my home site, laurazam.com. And on my main site, you'll see all my social media links. So I encourage people, especially to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, because I put out daily content.
I like your content. I've been watching that. We'll make sure we link them all down below when everybody subscribes today, and we will link all of Laura's stuff down below so that people can find you. And yeah, you opened my eyes to a couple things. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this has been really enlightening. And, it's daunting going into new relationships and having to have these talks all over again. And, no person's body is the roadmap to someone else's body. I think that's the other thing too, is that, if we've been with someone for a really long time, and then that's nerve-wracking to then go to somebody else, and you've spent all this time with this one body. This body works completely different. Right. And what if my body works completely different with this new person? There's a lot of stuff that it is up here, and being up here, it's very hard to be in here. So I think that is something that we all, need to work on, is to be able to pull that from our brain and into our body, and to think about the body parts. I really practice that during masturbation, of thinking about the parts of my body that I'm touching, because I'm very heady. And for me, if I go into my head too much, that's no bueno. So I try to focus that energy, like, okay, I'm touching this part of my body. What does that feel like? How, and go from there. It helps for someone like me who can be really in their head.
Well, that's
yeah. Oh, sorry. No, but that first P is presence.
I was just about to say Laura's first P.
A presence to yourself, even. I mean, I think most people think presence is, they think, oh, I have to be present for this other person, but to be present for oneself is so important.
Yes. And to be present, as you're saying, Susan, yes, so many of us struggle. I think most people do to some extent, right? To really be in our bodies. To really be in our bodies, not to be distracted, not to have, the anxiety hijacking our brains, not to be in fear and that pressure, but to just be here with sensation is a skill, really. That's really a learned skill. We need to practice that all the time, because it's not something that happens automatically.
Well, like you said in the beginning, go with the flow. Go with the flow. Be more in the flow. I'm going to practice that this weekend because of you. Be in the flow.
This has been really great. I've learned a lot, and I feel like the more these discussions happen, the more grounded we can become, and the more honest with ourselves and others we can become, it's half the battle, right? For anything and everything, but especially in the sexual realm.
Yeah, most definitely. I'll leave you with this. If somebody is experiencing any kind of issues, please come find me. Feel free to DM me. Happy to always talk to people about what's going on with them. But also, you can do a little self-diagnosis here by just looking at those 3 Ps and asking yourself, well, could this problem be addressed through more presence, more pleasure, and or more power? And just to see, maybe tease it out a little bit or chunk it down and see what's really the source of this. What's really the source of this?
I love it. Thank you for watching, everyone. Thank you, Laura, for being our guest today. Everybody, please subscribe, find us on social media, do all the things. Email us your questions. It's down below as well. Email atwy@gmail.com. I always have to think about it.
It's hard to remember.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. This has been really great.
Thank you, Miss Laura, and everybody stay well and connected.
Bye.
Bye-bye.